Well, thank you and welcome to this panel session on delivering precision medicine to patients. We've got a really exciting discussion ahead of us. I know we've got a team of people with very different perspectives, but a shared interest in precision medicine assembled. So I'm delighted to be able to welcome Monica Fletcher from HDRUK. We've got Nick Lench from Congenica. We've got Phillipa Brice from the PhD Foundation, and we've got Adam Collier from IQVIA. So some really interesting perspectives from different points of view on what we think is going to be a transformational change in the delivery of new medicines and also the tailoring of therapies inside healthcare. So let's get started. So I'm Steve Gardner. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Precision Life. We're an analytics business that uses technology to do high-resolution patient stratification of patient populations with a view to finding novel targets, helping design clinical trials to read out signal more efficiently, and then helping clinicians guide patients towards the right sort of medicines. I'm delighted to be joined by this august panel, and I'm going to get them to give an introduction, please, to themselves and their organization and how it plays into precision medicine. I'm going to go top left on my screen, which is Phillipa, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So I'm Phillipa Brice. I'm the External Affairs Director at the PhD Foundation, which is a health policy think tank linked with the University of Cambridge. And our focus is on making science work for health. We have a particular interest in genomics and all forms of personalised healthcare. And really our work centres around looking when we have scientific developments and potential that could improve health and healthcare. We look at the implications for policy and what steps will really be needed to help support effective implementation, ranging from quite technical things through to standards and also the wider public policy environment.
Fantastic. Mon, it's probably going this way. So how about your good self?
Yeah, hi, I'm Monica Fletcher, and my background is actually clinical backgrounds, and my clinical expertise is respiratory, but I'm coming at this at all kinds of different angles here today. I've been involved in working with patients, trying to, the translational part about getting patients more engaged in research, but also getting patients to understand research. That was in my role in the European Lung Foundation. I'm currently the partnerships lead, Breathe, which is an HDR UK data hub, which is how we can really utilize data for the greater good of patients. So I'm working across the whole field here with patients, clinicians, academics, industry, of how we can pull data for better usage for patient care. Thank you.
Fabulous. Nick, you get involved in actually using some of this data for the design of novel therapeutics.
Yep, great. Thanks, Steve. So I'm Nick Lench. I'm one of the co-founders and chief scientific officer at Congenica. We're a digital health company based on the Wellcome Genome campus in Cambridge, and our product is a clinical decision support system that supports the investigation and diagnosis of rare disease patients, really analysing next generation DNA sequence data. So we work very closely and an exclusive provider of our services to the NHS Genomic Medicine Service and Genomics England. So we really want to help reduce the diagnostic odyssey for patients, really for the benefit of patients and their families.
Fantastic. And Adam.
Hi, Adam Collier from IQVIA. Just to introduce IQVIA for people who don't know us, we call ourselves the Human Data Science Company, formed from the merger of a data and technology company called IMS Health and a CRO called Quintiles back in late 2016. My role is to build an emerging business that we're building across the EMEA region in genomics. Fundamentally, what we do is look for linked clinical and genomic data sets look at processing and cleaning those and making them available through various software and other technology tools for a variety of uses in the pharmaceutical industry across the life cycle, from drug discovery through to real world evidence generation and everything in between.
Thanks very much. That's fantastic. We're all sort of kind of known to one another for various different perspectives on the problem. We're very focused on using patient data to make a more effective mapping between the target biology of drug discovery programs over to patient subgroups, and starting to make that mapping a little bit more accurate, perhaps, than it has been in a traditional biopharma development model. I was going to ask around a number of those data access issues. Mon, what are the challenges, do you think, in terms of collecting large data sets from those patient populations, and what's your experience about building data sets for downstream study with collaborators?
Well, I think it starts right from the beginning, actually. I mean, it starts right from a public understanding about what we're talking about when we talk about data for individual patients. We're often told, you know, here we are in the UK, we have an integrated healthcare system, we must be data rich, but actually we're not when it comes down to it. Yes, there's lots of pockets of data, but actually it's not interrelated. And I think most patients are amazed. They somehow don't get that. They sort of feel, you know, they go and see their GP and somehow you go and see your hospital doctor and they know everything about you suddenly, and it should happen, but it doesn't happen. So I think the first thing is about public perception and about patients and where they sit in that. I think also the issue about data and the way we use the term data, what that means to people, what data are we talking about? Are we talking about diagnosis? Are we talking about biomarkers? What is it we're talking about when we talk about data? And obviously there's epidemiological data in there as well. So from my perspective, we're looking at this right across the board, from individual patient data, but then also anonymizing that for obviously greater use. But we're looking at, you know, from population databases as well. And also a lot more interesting things that are now becoming more available to us is social care data and much wider data. So I think, first of all, there's a whole definition about what are we talking about. Are we talking about the same thing? The biggest problem from where we see as Breathe, and one of the things that we've been created, and I think Adam is involved in this as well, is actually how do you link this data, make it meaningful for the right person, the researcher, the pharmaceutical company, the clinician. So how we have a big issue at this moment of trying to link all of these different sources of data. So there are lots of issues behind that, but I think actually what is data and how do we, you know, whose data is it and where does it sit and how do we link it? So
I'll touch on the technical aspects with Adam in a second, but Phillipa, just picking up on some of Mon's points there. How do you engage with the public more effectively? I mean, what do we need to tell the patient population, or in fact decision makers, about precision medicine and the necessity of sharing these data?
Yeah, well, there's been some interesting work done here already. I know Health Data Research UK are doing some very exciting stuff, and the Ada Lovelace. And also there's been some work done already by Genomics England. And in a sense, it's made more difficult by the fact that genomic data is one of the key elements of precision medicine, though by no means the only data you have to capture. And people do sometimes run a bit scared of anything with the word, you know, DNA or genomic in it. But I think their provisional work suggested that people actually, on the whole, were very willing to share with the health system and for their data to be shared with, you know, pharmaceutical and biotech companies, provided that they didn't get some sort of monopoly on the use of the data and that it was subsequently made available for public research as well. So I think in general, the public attitudes are quite good. And I think there's growing awareness in government of the value of capturing and using data. The thing is, I think that you need to make sure your systems for being suitably transparent and trustworthy are in place. And that's going to be particularly important if we want to start using our data assets, for access internationally as well as within this country, which I think we absolutely should. That's the way forward. But it makes it more important than ever that people feel they can trust the systems to use their data safely with appropriate protections and safeguards.
Absolutely. So, Nick, I mean, you're on the sharp end of this as a user of some of these data sets. How easy has it been for you to find the right types of data that are going to enable your research? And how successful have you been at doing that?
I think it's already been stated. I think a lot of these data are fragmented. They are difficult to bring together, to be perfectly honest. And certainly in the field of genetics and genomics, I think we're just at the beginning of that journey. So certainly for rare disease patients, having access to good longitudinal clinical outcome data would be really, really helpful. If that exists, it's not readily available. And clearly, even just accessing information about, patient diagnosis, what are the sharing data around markers, diagnostic markers, for example, if you share the same diagnostic mutation, what are the different phenotypes associated with that? So again, we're just beginning to see that happen now through a lot of international efforts and consortia. So I think the answer is, it's very much in its infancy, and it's really about building those systems in the coming years to collect and capture that data and share that data.
And obviously, as Mon alluded to, there's and you did too, Nick. There are challenges in pulling those data together and making them actually useful for this type of analysis. Adam, I know you're both in a position to build some of those large repositories, but you've also spent a lot of time and energy making the data within them more structured and useful. How much of a challenge remains there, and B, what do you think are the opportunities for bringing those type of data sets together?
Yeah, I think the opportunities are huge. We're having a huge amount of client interest in linked clinical genomic data sets. I won't say the exact percentage, but of the client queries that come in to say, can you help us? We probably cannot fulfill over half of the queries that come in because the lack of data that's available to answer the client request. And that's even with some quite sophisticated reworking of, is there another approach that can use the data is available to meet the client ultimate request? And we might make, perhaps we can achieve 70% of the original objectives. And interestingly, it's not the new genomic data that's causing the problem. That, it's a relatively new field. There's a certain amount of harmonization. There's some fantastic work that's done by the Global Alliance and so on. That means that the data is in some ways standardized and interoperable. The problem actually tends to be the linked clinical data, and that's the problem that HDR are obviously addressing. We often find that the data is missing, or the data is not, in some cases, the variables that are required are just not captured in clinical care at all because of a lack of time or incentives to do that. And even when they are, they may be poorly populated and certainly not interoperable between one data set and another. And actually, as we move to the era of precision medicine, you might be looking for 300 or 400 patients. It's kind of a needle in a haystack out of 60 million. So you need to start linking data sets together. And I think this is the opportunity to use some of the common data models, such as the OMOP common data model, to start to get some standardization across data sets so that we can pool the patient numbers together and get meaningful N numbers to do the important scientific research to bring the latest, newer medicines into the patient populations that would benefit from those. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for these new approaches to roll out more broadly, but ultimately we need good data capture at the point of clinical care, and we need people to be incentivized to do that.
Yeah, and I don't know, Monica or Phillipa, I mean, just in terms of getting that engagement to improve the quality of information that's captured and shared, what are the practical challenges, and what are the best practice that's out there for kind of improving that at source?
Well, one of the things that we're working with at the moment is just when it comes to just basic clinical data, are people using the right codes, for instance? You know, I mean, the people that input the data, they don't, unfortunately, they don't know what the end outcome of this is. So you have people inputting data, it doesn't really matter, does it? You have a trust who's in recent years have got more concerned about this, because actually, yes, money does matter, and that relates to coding. So that has tidied up some of this in the process. But actually, if people don't really know the importance of it and they're just doing a job, it's a bit like if you're I don't know, doing anything that's on a conveyor belt. If you don't know what the end product is and why it's so important, sometimes things get missed. So somehow we've got to get people engaged in the process of why this is important. There's lots of other things. I mean, you know, as a busy clinician myself, it is quite, you know, it's easy to cut. You've got a patient in front of you. It's easy to cut corners on collecting some data. So actually, we need to make our systems in hospitals a lot easier for people to input data. You know, and I'm sure we've all been to the States and other places, you know, where you technical hospitals as such, where it's all done at the point of contact with patients and you do it once and whatever. It causes lots of problems with electronic patient records. I know clinicians don't like it necessarily, and you need to engage them. So a lot of this is about engagement, whether it's the clinician or the inputter of the data. So yeah, I think we just have to make people realise that it's meaningful and it can make a difference, rather than just telling people to do things and that they're not doing it correctly, you know.
So, I mean, Phillipa, I mean, that's a great point. Are we even building into our health systems enough funding and time, a realization of the potential value of these data? Can there be more done to influence, you know, that sort of the more strategic aspects of using the patient resources that we have in order to fuel future biopharma research?
Yeah, I think there is a lot more that can be done, and I think that we have to find ways of doing it, although it's a real challenge. I mean, the report by Eric Topple for Health Education England last year was very good in that it acknowledged the need not only to make sure clinicians knew how to do, you know, use new technologies and things, but also that they needed time to learn how to do anything new. So it doesn't have to be a new technology, but anything new. And also they needed, you know, the right amount of time made available to them and incentives, so that time spent doing that was not just something to be squeezed in, but it was both required and recognised and rewarded. And I think the same applies to data. I mean, perhaps more importantly to data than any specific new technology, where they're perhaps more easily able to see the value. We have to increase the capacity of our health professional and support staff. We just need more of them so that they're not absolutely up against it all the time, if we can really expect them to get on board with this data requirement. As Mon said, to make sure they understand the end value, and also to make the systems really easy to use.
Phillipa, could I come back on that just to make a comment? One of the other things I'm involved in is the NHS Digital Academy, and the Digital Academy is all about this. It's about creating not just clinical but information leadership within the health service, and this is vital, and it's come out of the work that Phillips has talked about. So we are, you know, training up people within the NHS, but leadership in the NHS to make sure that this happens, and we need to actually, you know, permeate this throughout the health service, through undergraduate training, throughout, that actually, you know, data isn't just something that you add on. This is actually the world in which we live in, and it's happened in other industries. It hasn't quite hit the health service yet, and we are a bit slow behind, but you wouldn't think this in some of the other industries like banking and so forth, would you? It's normal practice and people have to do it, where it's not yet mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, data has to be the lifeblood of, you know, a learning, growing health service. And this is a difficult time to say that when everybody's already giving above and beyond standard levels. But that's why I think as we build into the future, that's got to be, embedded really at all levels.
I think we might have just lost Nick, which was a shame, because I was just about to ask him a follow-up question on that. But I'll switch over to Adam, if I may. Adam, there's a lot of different touch points for precision medicine through the various bits of the process. IQVIA is in a very interesting position to to work with clients who do a lot of that initial discovery work, and who are then taking the selection of targets and the mapping of the impact of those targets across various patient subgroups, then collating populations, and then presumably supporting them in the transition out to healthcare. How do you see precision medicine permeating all of those ecosystems? How do they come together through that as well?
It's a great question. I think today, the way that the biopharmaceutical industry tends to be organized, certainly in the bigger companies and the sort of larger of the medium size, is there are people who have quite specific roles. And in the life cycle of a drug, you've kind of got all your sort of preclinical work that's done in the lab, and then it goes into the sort of early phase clinical work. It's generally handed over to a different team to run that. And then you go sort of through phase 2 and 3, which tends to be run by yet another team together on that. And then, as a drug comes onto the market and is launched, yet another team will take over the responsibility for measuring that. That's all well and good, and is excellent for the sort of historical view of fairly broadly used drugs with quite large patient populations. But in the world of sort of precision medicine, where there's a very small number, I think these companies need to think a lot more sort of end to end and start to think about their evidence requirements. Sort of first when they're doing their phase 1 studies, or even earlier than that, they need to think, how are we going to collect the data on those specific patients post-launch? How are we going to do our post-marketing safety studies and post-marketing effectiveness studies? And if you think about drugs like sort of tumor agnostic drugs that are coming onto the market at the moment, it is very likely that in certain tumor sites, they're going to have better effectiveness, a better sort of effectiveness to risk profile in certain tumor sites than others. It's almost certain. We don't know that yet for sure in the real world, because those drugs have only recently been launched, but we're assuming that's going to happen. And so I think to get the patients to get the maximum benefit from these newer drugs, people need to be thinking very sort of holistically about that post-marketing part of the drug life cycle and designing their studies accordingly, because you need to follow the same patients all the way through the randomized trials, but actually into the real world. So we'd really encourage pharmaceutical companies to think sort of end to end and have people assigned to the data requirements, the evidence need requirements all the way through the life cycle, and make sure that handoff isn't lost.
It is, I mean, I totally agree with you. I wonder if there's even a stage beyond that, which is, healthcare is moving to more of an outcomes-based remuneration model. And in such a context, actually, one of the ways of maximizing potential revenue is to ensure that you are prescribing medicines to the right patients. And I wonder if those criteria might go that one stage further as well.
Yeah, I think if the incentives are designed appropriately, so for example, if you were to reevaluate medicine every 2 or 3 years, based on the actual real world uptake of that drug in clinical practice, then you're going to put incentives in place for the pharmaceutical companies. From a policy perspective, we can put incentives in place that mean that the pharmaceutical companies are investing in ensuring the right patients are getting their drugs, so that the maximum benefit to the minimum risk is experienced in the overall patient population. So, I just think, the regulators and people who are sort of in charge of the policy level decisions need to think that way as well, and design the systems in future to ensure that the investment is done to make sure that happens. Precision medicine is a new area for us, and I think we need to slightly redesign the system to work with it, because it isn't designed for that at the moment. I think there's quite a lot of challenging thinking, but the technologies are there, and they're improving very rapidly. So we have the technical means to do some of this work that's required, but I think people need to make sure that it's all put in place appropriately in order to realise the benefits that are potentially there.
Yeah, it's a very structural issue as much as a technical one. Nick, sorry, we skipped over you just a second there. I was going to ask you, I guess the poster child of precision medicine has very much been oncology in the past, but Congenica is much more focused on a wider variety of rare diseases. How are you finding the ability to apply to precision medicine type techniques to rare diseases, and where are some of the kind of success stories you point to?
Yeah, that's right, absolutely. So oncology has always been seen as the exemplar for precision medicine, but I think what we're seeing now, of course, is now more patients are being diagnosed with rare disease, and the ability to really understand, you know, what are the shared molecular mechanisms that underlie those disorders. Then you can really start to investigate and apply precision medicine to rare disease. So there's some really nice examples we're seeing in the epilepsies, in the epilepsy field. So, for example, patients with a disorder called Dravet syndrome, more often than not, will have a mutation in a sodium channel gene called SCN1A, and there are now therapies targeted towards SCN1A and indeed another sodium channel, SCN1A2. We see that with potassium channels as well, and also in epilepsy, there's a therapy called the ketogenic diet. So again, GLUT1 deficiency patients, putting them onto a ketogenic diet. So it's not an expensive precision therapy per se, but it's a very effective therapy. I think that's really exciting. And we're only going to see more of this. And again, what's fascinating, I think, about the biology of these rare diseases is you can then start to target, you know, the molecular cause, the protein that's altered. Whereas before, I think we'd focus on the clinical diagnosis of people with shared symptoms, but obviously, just because you have the same symptom doesn't mean you have the same underlying molecular cause. So I think we're going to see a lot more success in applying precision medicine to rare disease. So I think it's super exciting.
Yeah, I was going to come back to Mon on that as well, because you know, actually, as well as rare diseases, we also have pockets of unmet medical need within quite common diseases, and I know Mon through work on non-T2 asthma, which is a relatively poorly served, but way into double digits of the percentage of the asthma patients. What do you think the opportunities are, Mon, for dealing with some of these, you know, some of these areas of unmet medical need, even within relatively well understood and well worked on disease areas?
Well, I think it's amazing. And I'm just going back, if you take Nick's example there, even with patients with epilepsy, you know, patients who have long-term conditions are often badged as those that don't get better on common medicines are badged as either being non-compliant or difficult patients, or they get into a kind of a group, and the first reaction is kind of, oh, they can't be taking these medicines because we've got all these medicines. And if you take asthma, for instance, where we've actually lumped asthma as a diagnosis into one, their symptoms, as Nick was saying, if patients have a bunch of symptoms, we call it one disease. There's lots of diseases we do that. We do that with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. You know, there are so many different types of under those symptoms that we just lump for us. And now we're actually going from that back into splitting and trying to think, no, which of taking these medicines. So as a patient, I'd rather not be on inhaled corticosteroids for 25 years, and they really hasn't done anything for me, rather than giving me cataracts or perhaps some other kind of side effects over those years. I'd rather be told this medicine is going to work, and we know it's going to work for you. And that's, you know, we thought a few years ago that we had a cure for asthma. You know, we at that point, we thought we discovered everything we knew about asthma and that precision medicine was around the corner. Translating what we know, science, into the practicalities of what that means to patients is a long way down the line. And you know, we're having these conversations at this moment about COVID and what is COVID, and there are the different types of, you know, patients with different, you know, manifestations and responses, whatever. And I think the current environment has actually made a lot of people realise that people don't have the same, with the same, you know, what is called the same condition, have the same responses to that, and that personalised medicine is far more important. And I think it's getting the public to understand it. So we were talking previously offline about what is precision medicine. You know, does that term help people? I'm not sure it does, but something that is about me, and I know we use the term personalised in a different way, but I'm not sure precision medicine helps the public to understand what we're talking about. But I want to take something that is going to work for me. And with with the the fewer side effects as possible, and that's that's why we're all here. But getting to that and getting to there quicker, I think we have the ability. It's just, as this conversation is saying, there's a lot of things in the way at this moment in time.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And I saw a quote recently from the Chief Clinical Officer about Verily Life Sciences. And he was basically saying the organization's thinking has been transformed around to personalization at scale in the context of healthcare. And it amused me because I actually tried to trademark that term a few years ago. But I wonder, Phillipa, Mon raised the current environmental challenge of COVID. There was another set of quotes out there that the adoption of personalized digital health and personalized medicine has been thought to have been accelerated 5-fold by various thinkers in the US. I wonder, are we ready for that? And what, are the incentives in place? To Adam's point earlier, there's a lot of structural and transformational things that need to be done, but what's the practical challenge of actually making some of this stuff a reality?
Yeah, well, transformational change is never a comfortable situation. It's a good thing to do, but inevitably it does throw up barriers, and particularly if you're trying to switch to a very different way of working and patch it onto an old one. If you stopped one thing and started another, it'd be a lot easier than trying to do an incremental change, which inevitably you have to do because it's not a straight switch. I think some of the things that Mon alluded to in terms of our understanding about how medicines and treatments even work is part of the answer. So I think we need a better public and policy understanding of when it's not appropriate to have a treatment, as well as when it is appropriate to have an exciting new treatment that's much better and has fewer side effects. I think it's often poorly understood that if you're excluded from a treatment or a trial, it's not necessarily a rationing decision. It's because it would do you little good and make you profoundly unhappy. Although, of course, cost considerations are always there as well, so that makes it a bit more complicated. So I think that's one element, and I think another one is around the understanding of actually how little we've understood in the past and how we are shifting to a very different conception of all sorts of disease, which, as you said, is nicely illustrated by COVID. There are revelations in who gets what, why, when, and in what form that really are going to have profound effects for medicine, and anything that has a big impact on medicine is going to require a lot of support for change in the associated systems. And, inevitably it'll boil down to a lot of practical steps that we have to take to move us closer. But I think understanding that change is coming is probably the first step. That there are some things which are fundamentally different starting to emerge onto the market. And also, I think the other thing I would point to is, and COVID's been very useful here, is a shift in understanding of the importance of diagnostics. In the past, we tend to get hung up on the treatments as the thing, and that's understandable. But actually, there is no precision or personalised medicine without the best diagnostics. And I think we've been helped in our appreciation of that. They've been rather the poor relation in the past.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. I mean, Adam, you're again, you sit in a business that spans a whole range of these areas, and you actually have patient registries as well. You do real world evidence type populations. Is there an argument for extending the leverage of those types of existing data sets to prove out some of the potential of diagnostic products in precision medicine type applications?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'd say on that. One is just economics of drug development is going to have to change, because if you're developing a drug that might be used in 30 or 40,000 patients worldwide, you need to recoup your investment over that many patients. If you're developing a medicine which might be used in 5,000 or whatever, or a tenth, you need to divide the cost of developing those medicines by 10 as well. Otherwise, the economics just fall out the window. So we can't just go around looking for sort of 10 or 20% improvements by doing things in a slightly more efficient way with perhaps lower cost staff and so on. We need to think quite radically about how precision medicines are actually developed, and using sort of pre-existing data sources that are used for secondary uses that perhaps you use for clinical care primarily. Their secondary usage can be to prove the effectiveness of medicines, I think is one of those radical cost saving pieces, but also finding patient populations that are precision themselves, very targeted, using data sources that are in there, a part of the solution. I think the world of diagnostics, which is a sort of slightly related question, is also is changing. I think certainly for COVID's put it on the map, but I think we are about to or beginning to enter into a world where the kind of companion diagnostic that's linked to a specific drug is no longer going to be, particularly in oncology, it's not going to be a viable proposition, because you may have 80 or 100 precision medicines on the market. You can't go through each patient taking, on average, if there were 100 medicines and each one had one test, you would be at about 50 tests per patient before you get to the right one. Obviously, it would be slightly more precise than that. That isn't really going to work until you find the right one. So the diagnostic industry has started to develop, but I think there needs to be adoption of some of the sort of more complementary diagnostic market where 50 or 100 different potential drugs are looked for with a single test. And there's certainly products like that coming onto the market. I think liquid biopsies and some of the other new technologies that are coming are going to support as well, because some of them are pan cancer. But we need to be thinking, fairly broadly. We can't do single gene variant tests for every patient unless you've got a very high probability of success. We need to be looking for, in one panel, we need to be looking for all the different precision medicines that might be on the market all rolled up. So people need to think quite broadly about how, again, the funding and incentives are in place to get broad usage of these slightly more expensive but much more useful diagnostic tests. That's kind of the IQVIA view, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and makes a great deal of sense. There is obviously the challenge of creating those data in the first place, and I wonder, for example, I'll throw the question back to Mon. Science is developing all the time. You are working with patient groups, and you're actually collecting data sets around a variety of different disease areas. There's obviously a cost associated with that. How targeted do you feel you need to be around particular technologies to make those data as useful as possible?
I think that's an interesting question, and I think we need to go back to write some of the basics, actually. And we can go into targeted, but we haven't got right. I think I go back to the point that I raised earlier. We haven't got, people think we've got NHS linked data, and we haven't got NHS linked data. So before we get into sort of, precision and, not somewhere get this drive to link NHS data quite easily. Not every single time somebody wants to do a trial, but we have to go and get linked data. We need to be able to have this. And I think it's the fundamental for everyone in this room, in this discussion here today, is if we had basic linked data sets to start off with, we can then put the icing on the cake. But I think, that's the first thing I'd actually make a plea for. It's ridiculous. And as I say, I think most patients have no idea. I mean, I'm fortunate to, as part of Breathe, we work with SAIL, which is the data bank in Wales, and the Welsh Government invested in that linked data set from many years ago. And so patients within Wales, their prescribing data, their NHS data, their hospital data is linked, and it's being used for the right purposes. And people know that that's the case. I think most people who have availed themselves of the health service in recent years, and particularly through this COVID issue, I think most people would have no problem that their data was linked, and you know, as long as they knew, going back to Phillipa said earlier, the trust, and you know, that it's stored somewhere, and it's pseudo-anonymized, anonymized, whatever we want to say. But I think most people expect that their data is used. It's almost like a return on like using the NHS, which is free at the point of delivery. Why would your data not be used for what we want to do, precision medicine in the future? So when we say to more difficult data sets and whatever, let's get the basics right.
Yeah. And
I'm getting a few nods with my colleagues here who obviously have had the same frustrations. And
well, as you know, I mean, we've done a large research in the genetics of host response to COVID, and we've been seeking to replicate those findings inside the clinical data, and we've hit all of the issues that everybody has been describing with those studies, just in terms of the number of patients who have clean enough data to be able to run those studies.
And we are the envy outside of the UK. I think I started by saying people think you're so lucky to live in the UK. You've got all this linked data sets, and it must be great for drug discovery. And
yeah. Okay, so let's be optimistic about this. We've got a new year coming in. I think we all are absolutely convinced on the call that precision medicine is where the industry, the biopharma and healthcare industries are going to be, the focus that they're going to have in, let's say, a 5-year time frame. What do you foresee the trends either in 2021, or what are the big successes that you're hoping to see in making precision medicine into more of a widespread reality? I'm going to start with Nick, because you're kind of again at the sharp end of doing of making insights that are actually going to affect patients in the short term.
Yeah. No, thank you. Well, I think a number of things. Obviously, within England, we have the NHS Genomic Medicine Service launching. So to get truly diagnostic whole genome sequencing embedded into routine clinical practice will be amazing, and the number of diagnoses that come out of that will obviously shape precision medicine. I think technology improvements will continue to drive the cost of genome sequencing down. We'll see genome sequencing applied to other big research cohorts. UK Biobank is a fantastic example of the benefit of genomic data and healthcare data, and clearly there are other initiatives out there to start to whole genome sequence some of these rich data sets. So certainly over the next 1 to 5 years, I would see these big population data sets with sort of whole genome data being generated for them will really start to give us amazing insights into disease biology, and how that you move, or how you understand rare monogenic disease, and how that then moves into polygenic disease and common complex disease. So I think we'll start to understand a lot more about the underlying biological pathway. So yeah, I think it's going to be very exciting.
And Adam, from your perspective, what do you think your biopharma customers and your healthcare and disease charity customers, for that matter, are going to be doing to deliver precision medicine in their businesses?
We have, there's a lot of inquiries that are coming in, and it comes from different sorts of departments within pharmaceuticals looking for linked clinical genomic data sets, as I said before. What we think is very likely the technology now exists to run a federated type approach, where you may have, for example, 3 or 4 data sets with a number of patients in, and they're often held in a trusted research environment, and the pharmaceutical company isn't able to look at or touch the individual patient, anonymized patient level data. But what they can do now, there are sort of API type approaches which allow you to sort of delve in and aggregate results across those 4 different data sets and pull out effectively aggregate results across the 4 to come up with a statistically significant conclusion. So I think this world of the federated data set it's available, it's technically possible using APIs, as I said before, all the technology is kind of in place. I think what we need to do now is make sure that the people who are sitting on top of data assets are thinking, you know, how can we make these APIs available to the various people that want to use it so that the data can get the maximum usage and the maximum benefit out of it. And I think we are, you know, we're really on the cusp of that. So I think if you were looking back 5 years' time, people would be very surprised that, you know, because federated, I think, will become the predominant way of accessing data. And it has all the benefits. The data doesn't have to move. You haven't got to physically move it, which is good. It has security benefits. Patients, you know, have much more confidence in it because they know their data is being stored where they said it was going to be stored. It's not being moved to different countries and so on. But you then get the benefit of pooling data across multiple different sort of ethnicities and demographics and different types and building big numbers. So that's what I think is going to be a really big trend. And one thing I do say, I mean, we've talked a lot about the challenges, but I also have seen a huge amount of progress in the last 3 or 4 years. I've been in real world evidence for 7 years. And in the last few years, it's really taken off. And I think initiatives such as the HDRUK sort of data directory and so on is really leading to that. And I think there's been, you know, I feel there's been a lot of progress. I mean, we do need to make progress because with Brexit and so on, the UK is not going to have the natural advantages it had before. But I do think that there's been, you know, a huge amount of progress made in the last few years to get this data more accessible, linked, cleaned up, curated, improved at source, and all the other things we've talked about. So, you know, congratulations to all the people who've been involved in those initiatives.
So fantastic. And Mon, you're nodding through that. Aside from all of that, what are you hoping for? What's going to actually help your impact?
I kind of feel the impetus. I think it's been raised before, but there's been a lot of, you know, if you can take anything positive out of what's happened to this country and the world over the last 9 months, I think we need to take some of the positive things out there. People have become more collaborative. Like Adam was saying, you know, how do we get data across the world? The International COVID Alliance, which I'm working with at the moment, where we're tackling that to get data from across the world. So federated data. I hope we can keep this momentum going. I think is what I feel. We've had a lot of advances, and let's keep the power, as we said, as Phillipa said earlier about this current pandemic. Let this become the norm in the future.
Oh, thank you, because that was a great. I was just going to finish with Phillipa. I mean, do you think that this situation has given us a new impetus and a new way of working, a much more collaborative way of working that will actually make precision medicine a reality sooner?
Yeah, I hope so. I think we have seen that incredible things can be achieved if you put enough, you know, effort behind them. And whilst you can't have sort of heroic efforts on all fronts at the same time, I think sometimes just catching sight of that vision and really believing you can get there does make a difference. And, you know, even things like, I was thinking we've had a lot of public discourse around, you know, health inequalities and diversity and inclusion at all sorts of different levels. But that's really helped strengthen the realisation about the need for representative data sets so that, you know, the data you put in is going to generate insights that will be applicable to lots of different subgroups and subpopulations. And I think, you know, we'll really see the benefits of that on a relatively short timescale, I hope.
Well, that's a great sentiment to leave this. I want to thank everybody. I think we're all optimists here, and I know everybody is playing a major part in making this a reality. So I want to thank all 4 of you and the organisers at One Nucleus for setting this up. And may I wish you all to stay very safe and be very successful in 2021. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.